Hello and welcome. I'd like to welcome everyone to our candidate event forum for the 55th Senate District. My name is Barbara Grosh. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester Metropolitan Area. We're very happy to host this event tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We do not endorse candidates or parties. We try to do everything we can to help voters be informed voters. And one of the things we love doing is sponsoring events like this, where we can hear directly from our candidates and ask questions. So I am going to introduce to you our moderator for tonight. So Georgia DiGregorio, please take it away.
Okay. And I say welcome to the audience and thank you, and thank the candidates for participating in our forum. As Barbara said, this is a forum for the 55th New York State Senate District. Our candidates are Samra, Brouk, and Len Morell. And I have a biographical statement from them. Samra Brouk was born and raised in the city of Rochester and Pittsford. Miss Brouk served in the Peace Corps, providing health education in rural Guatemala, and has worked with various nonprofits and startups that focused on tackling some of the society's greatest challenges, such as climate change and education inequities, as well as better serving our aging population. Len Morell is a self-made, successful business person and community advocate who has created jobs, mentored local students, and given back to our community for decades. He was born and raised in Monroe County and has dedicated his life to servant leadership and making our community the best place it can be. Now, for the attendees, this is just some information. The League of Women Voters has prepared questions to ask the candidates, but we'd like you to get in on the act. And if you have any questions you'd like all of the candidates to answer, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. All questions will be asked of all candidates. Our timekeeper this evening is Judy Sternberg, who will, I don't know, you can see her on the screen by her name. She will hold up cards to let the candidates know how much time they have left and when their time is up. The first candidate to answer a question has 1.5 minutes, and the second candidate will have 1 minute for their answer of the same question. And now it's time for the candidates' opening statements. Each candidate has 1 minute, and they will go in alphabetical order by the last name. So, Ms. Brouk, it is for you to, come on screen and begin.
Thank you so much, Georgia. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this forum together. It's such an important piece for civic education and also making sure voters can make informed decisions. Good evening, everyone. I am your state senator, Samra Brouk, and I am so happy to be here with you all today. You know, in 2020, you all sent me to Albany with a mandate that you wanted Rochester to have a voice at the table, at every table where decisions were being made. And in the last 2 years, I have worked diligently to be that voice. You told me that your students and your teachers needed more funding and resources to be effective. So I went to Albany and secured the largest investment we've ever had in our public schools in New York State's history. You shared with me the struggles folks were having with mental health and the need for more providers. And as chair of the Mental Health Committee, I have worked tirelessly to fund organizations and make sure that we reform the way we deal with mental health crisis. It would be an honor to continue doing that work for you for the next 2 years, and I look forward to our forum tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to give your opening statement?
Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters. And I just want to say congratulations to Senator Brouk on the birth of her new baby. You pointed out, I'm founder of a small manufacturing company, also a community outreach center, and an organic affordable housing project. I was born in Rochester in a blue collar family, grew up in a small home. I built all my organizations with no partners or investors or government money or special grants of any kind, just my faith in God and belief in the American dream. I've got a lifelong history of volunteering, starting in my 20s at the Monroe County Penitentiary through my church's prison ministry, all through my 20s on InterVarsity Fellowship in college. In my 30s, I coached the Penfield girls softball team. I also was on the Penfield Planning Board. I volunteered at Rochester Animal Shelter for over a decade, and I'm currently a volunteer at UPrep Charter School in the city of Rochester. I believe any politician is represented by their values, actions, and outcomes, and our outcomes in New York State have been troubling. The FBI ranks Rochester in the top 5 most dangerous cities in New York State. We're in the top 10 highest property taxes in the nation, the top 10 highest income tax and healthcare costs in the nation. 5 out of 10 of our city public school students flunk or drop out. And we have a stigma even in our suburban schools that all our students have to go to college to be successful while neglecting high-paying trades and tech opportunities. More people are leaving New York State than any state in the nation. We're failing on almost every metric. And I have a plan to change all of that, which is I'm hoping to share with you tonight.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Morell, you are the first one to answer this first question. In the incoming legislative session, you will be asked to vote on an amendment to our New York State Constitution. And for our audience, I will summarize its content. After the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision in a special session, the New York State Legislature passed a bill to amend the state constitution to add new protected classes to the state constitution's already existing Equal Protection Clause. Currently, it prohibits discrimination based on a person's race, color, creed, or religion. What was added is ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, or sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. In order for the amendment to take effect, the incoming legislature would have to pass it, and then it would go to the voters. So, if elected, will you vote in favor of this bill? Why or why not?
Thank you for the question. I would need to see the amendment to really comment in detail on that, but I believe all people are created equal under God and should be treated as such by our government, by our legal system, and society at large. We also need to ensure that when we're implementing those types of equal rights initiatives, we do not create special classes of citizens that have more rights than others. So I can tell you that I would be willing to diagnose and understand that bill much better than I can right now in this brief time period. I'd like to read the detail and I'd like to see the amendment, but my core as a person is treating others the way I want to be treated, being slow to judge, and servant leadership. And so I'm certainly supportive of equality of all people, and that would be the best way I could answer that today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brouk, the same question.
Thank you, Georgia. You know, before I'm a state senator, I'm a woman living in this country, and I'm also a new mother of a young girl who's growing up in this country. And I cannot overstate the fear and the terror that so many of us felt when that thing that we theoretically had been fearing would happen was finally done. And that's when our radical conservative Supreme Court shot down Roe v. Wade. We knew for years that it was a possibility, and we all tried to work towards it, but now it is our reality. And what we're seeing in states all across the United States is the rollback of rights that I have had the privilege of having my entire life. And now I'm meant to live in a place where my young 6-month-old is going to grow up potentially with fewer rights than I did. And so when I had the chance in the state legislature to come back in for a special session, to leave said beautiful baby girl here and go to Albany to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment, there was no question in my mind. We finally had a chance to pass this, and I proudly voted yes. And if I'm allowed to go back to the state Senate with the voters behind me, I will once again vote yes.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Brouk, you have this question. In 2019, New York State passed bail reform legislation that ended the use of cash bail in most misdemeanor and nonviolent felony cases. It went on into effect at the start of 2020 and underwent some rollback revisions a few months later. What are your views on the impact of bail reform, and would you support further rollbacks of the legislation or maintain it as it is?
Thank you, Georgia. I think it's always important to give context, right? So when I was running the first time for this seat, we talked about this exact same law that had passed right before I entered the state Senate. And the thing about our justice system is that until we passed this law, we had a justice system that wasn't predicated on justice, unfortunately. It was predicated on whether or not someone had the ability to pay. And now that I've had the honor of representing so many voters and constituents here in the 55th district and working on these issues for 2 years, I can tell you without a doubt that the majority of New Yorkers believe that a justice system should not be based on your ability to pay, about your access to wealth. Because before we put these reforms in, it had nothing to do with innocence or guilt, because recall, we live in a country where we are innocent until proven guilty. But instead, whether or not you were sent to jail was based on if you were rich or poor, if you had someone who could lend you tens of thousands of dollars or you didn't. The other thing we have to remember is when they had these onerous implications for someone who didn't have access to money, we're talking about throwing a mother in jail for something. Now she can't go to work. She can't take her kids to school. Her entire life might be upended. And through these reforms, what we have done is given many people another lease on life, so that the worst thing that they've ever done is not the thing that defines them. And being poor doesn't mean you have to rot in a jail cell. And that's where these reforms came from. And that's what these reforms have done. They have kept families intact, and they have allowed people to continue to earn their wages and be there for their families.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to answer the same question?
Yes. Actually, these reforms, which had their roots in compassion, as Senator Brouk pointed out, so that just people that could afford it would get out, they lacked accountability. And whenever you have compassion without accountability, you have chaos. And that's what we have right now. And that's why even Democrat Sheriff Baxter says FBI is ranked in the top 5 most dangerous cities in New York State, because we have repeat offenders, not mothers, repeat offenders that are walking the streets, that are violent criminals. In addition to that, these failed policies put in place by Senator Brouk, they need to be revised. They need to be reinstated. We need to give jurisdiction back to judges. Even Kathy Hochul in her latest statement says we need a plan to fix New York's bail reform law. That was her latest mail out. She recognizes that it's broken. It's not working. We need to fix it. I would fund our police. I would revise and reinstate the bail reform. I would give jurisdiction back to judges to keep violent offenders off the street. And ultimately, to reduce crime, racism, bullying, and violence, all of this, the answer is through education. It's because
Okay.
all this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Morell, you have this question. The New York Independent Redistricting Commission failed in its mission to create new maps for the U.S. House of Representatives, the New York Senate, and New York Assembly. Would you support changes to the redistricting process in New York? And if so, what specific changes would you support?
To my knowledge, our districts were already redistricted, so I really can't answer that question without more detail.
Okay. Ms. Brouk, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Georgia. This is of huge importance. And I say that as someone who ran, if we all recall, in 2020, I ran for this seat. It was a traditionally Republican held seat, and it was an incredibly gerrymandered seat. And that is why this kind of reform is so important. So just to remind folks, when I would drive throughout this district, trying to talk to voters running for the first time in 2020, people would ask me, well, How do you cover 2 counties? You know, there's enough people here that you could even just cover 1 county. And the truth is, I proudly represent Monroe and Ontario counties, but that wasn't fair to a lot of voters that their state senator had to cover such a large area. It was nearly 70 miles from the northern tip to the southern tip. We're talking Lake Ontario all the way to the southern tip of Canandaigua Lake. I covered 2 counties. Of course, now with redistricting, it's a much more compact district. So these are important things that we do need to kind of get in the weeds of and have redistricting. But the truth is, historically, it has been when in Republican hands, we get these gerrymandered districts. And New York has worked very hard to make sure that we have fair representation, because at the end of the day, the most important piece is that each voter feels that their voice matters and that their representation represents them.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Samra, you're up for the first response, and this comes from the audience. Where do you stand on a woman's right to choose? And that is for Samra.
That's the whole question. Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I am a proud supporter of reproductive choice. We should all have autonomy over our own bodies. And I also think it's important for people to understand, and I said this earlier, but I can't stress enough. You know, people have said, you know, oh, it's not that bad, it's not that serious. Well, I'm here to tell you, as a woman of childbearing age living in this country, it is terrifying to imagine that a radical conservative Supreme Court, who I didn't vote for, is now knocking down precedent and rights that we have held dear for decades. You know, when I talk to voters and I talk to my grandparents and my parents, and they say, oh, we fought for that. You're done with that. We don't need to fight for that anymore. Never in a million years did they think that their daughter, their granddaughter, their great-granddaughter would be fighting those same fights. And it is serious. I want folks to understand it is serious here in New York. We only had a pro-choice Democratic majority in the state Senate starting in January of 2019. And that's how we passed the Reproductive Health Act, which we call codifying Roe v. Wade. But now we are actually passing constitutional amendments to the New York State Constitution to make sure that New York State can be the last beacon, so that whatever happens on the Supreme Court, New Yorkers need to know that they are protected. And that's why the Equal Rights Amendment was so important. That's also why it was important to pass my bill, the Reproductive Equity Act, to close loopholes for insurers to not cover abortion. They now have to cover abortion care, because abortion care is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right, and we can't go back.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, I would. I agree with Samra. That's an important issue. I don't know if she's confused or just dramatizing. In 2019, this really is a non-issue in New York State due to passing in the 2019 Reproductive Health Care Act. It was actually heralded and cheered as the act that would guarantee women's right to choice, irregardless of what happens with the Supreme Court or at the federal level. So there's really there's nothing at this point. There's no way anyone any female would not have that choice. But furthermore, my opinion on this whole subject is that I believe this is a private medical issue that needs to be discussed between a woman and her personal health care professional. That's it, plain and simple, where I stand on the subject of choice.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Morell, you will have the answer the first time. Should the state government do more to provide an equitable, quality public education for all children pre-K through grade 12? If so, what would you suggest?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that, because education's been a huge part of my life. As I said, I started volunteering very young, mentoring young people. Having been an engineering background in the tool and die industry, I've done a lot to help young people in the trades. I feel that we are missing something significant in our education, and this is simply what I would consider to be really a critical part of the legislation I would present if elected state senator. First of all, to guarantee equality, to reduce crime, to eliminate racism, bullying, and violence, we have to tackle it through education, because we all know all of that is rooted in hatred, which is a learned behavior. For that, I would launch my We Are One initiative. This is an ethics class based on the premise we are one race, the human race. I would have it taught at all schools beginning in kindergarten, a curriculum developed in conjunction with academia, business, and government, teaching universal principles of success, such as treat others the way you want to be treated, be slow to judge, serve in leadership, along with role model mentors from the community and a recognition program for students, similar to the work I've done in our charter schools. I feel very passionate about this. Many of your young people are in broken homes, don't have the available support systems that many of us had, and they need to hear a positive, encouraging, help one another, teamwork-based, forward-thinking, problem-solving approach.
Thank you. Samra, would you please answer that question?
Absolutely. First, I want to start with just the fact that I am a proud graduate of our public schools. And the other piece is, not only am I the daughter of a public school teacher who's taught in several districts throughout our area, but another key part of my story is that I've also experienced education differently depending on where I was in the 55th district. So many folks know that I grew up in the city of Rochester and attended public schools in the city. And then I ended up graduating from Pittsford-Mendon High School and experienced school in the suburbs as well. And that was one of the driving things behind my first run for state senate, was that I understood what it meant to have equitable funding for schools. It means you have the supplies you need. It means you have enough books and updated books for every student to learn their best. It means you have enough teachers who are there to give you their all every day. And so when I started in the Senate in January 2021, I went with that mandate to improve our public schools. And I brought back and advocated for the single largest investment in New York's history into our public schools of over $4 billion.
Thank
I'll
you.
expect to stop.
All right. But Samra, you will be the one to answer first this question. In 2021, New York State voters opted to not pass measures that would have expanded access to voting by permitting no excuse by mail voting and same-day voter registration. What measures do you support to improve and secure elections and voting for our New York State citizens?
Such an important question. I have to say, I think if you think about some of our most sacred rights, our most hard fought for rights, especially my own ancestors, voting rights are at the top of that list. And that's why we put it to the voters as a legislature last year to pass these measures of same-day voter registration and no excuse mail-in voting. Unfortunately, as you said, they didn't pass, but as someone who actually sits on the elections committee, this is one of the top priorities because we have to make voting easier. The intimidation that exists on people trying to make their voices heard, the fact that we have national Republicans still denying the outcomes of elections that we have had, this is scary stuff. And if we don't protect the right to vote, if we don't protect the ability for everyone to have their voices heard, free of intimidation, free of barriers, then we are no better than that. And so this is something that remains a priority. I chose to be on the elections committee in the state Senate because this is something that's so important to me. And I also think people need to remember that New York State, unfortunately, ranks pretty low when it comes to voter turnout. And part of that is because we have failed to pass these measures. I talked to a lot of folks about the fact that in 2018, I was knocking doors in Georgia for Stacey Abrams. I knocked on a door and I said, "Have you voted yet, sir?" And he told me, "Oh, I early voted." And I looked at him perplexed because here in New York State, we didn't have that. And I wondered, how is it that Georgia has more progressive voting rights at that time than New York did? So certainly there is a lot of work that we need to do. And you absolutely have my commitment that I'll continue to push to advocate for those changes.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to answer that question?
Yes. First of all, no excuse by mail voting and same-day voter registration were both seen as way too prone to fraudulent activity. And that was seen that way by both Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And I fully support the will of the people who voted this down. The fact that and by the way, the Republicans crying that elections weren't fair, the Democrats do the exact same thing when Hillary Clinton lost. So that's just, a little bit of drama. And I blame both of them for doing that. but I support voter ID at the ballot box. I support an audit of the voter rolls to restore confidence in our vote. And bottom line is, Senator Brouk and I have to remember, we represent the voters. As I go door to door to door, I hear more and more and again and again and again, even though the Democrats have run our state for a decade and all the problems we have, they have forgot what the voters are to them. They're their boss. It's not the other way around. So they voted it down 11 months ago. I don't see how we can try to just ignore them and say we're going to ram it through anyway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And you're up for the first answer to the next question. What policies do you support for New York State to address climate change and the damage caused by climate change?
That was for me, correct, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
I'm pretty disgusted with a lot of what I hear coming out of the Democrat Party on climate change. They make sweeping mandates and statements and changes. And I come from a trades engineering background. That's my background. So in a nutshell, the most beneficial policies to address climate change and the damage, we have to take an engineering approach. What I mean by that, we have to, first of all, things like ensure our infrastructure is prepared for transition. A full engineering approach that includes a grid capability study, kilowatt demand requirements, battery recycle analysis, lithium waste treatment, and more. I would say that I wouldn't guess that 75% or more of our current senators don't even know what those terms mean. You can't just say, let's just switch to battery cars tomorrow. If we flip the switch and we switched even half the country over, we would all be very unhappy because we'd all come home to a home that doesn't have any lights on, doesn't have any heat on it, and doesn't have any air conditioning because we do not have the infrastructure. So I am a fierce advocate for a clean environment. And I consider it a priority, but without an engineering approach, it's just another political rhetoric statement to get people's emotions up and try to get politicians elected. We need an engineering approach. Until we do that, we're just wasting our time.
Thank you. Thank you. Samra, would you like to answer that question about climate change?
Absolutely. It's interesting that this question came up today. I was just reading an article, not literally an hour and a half ago, and it was a report that they were finding traces of plastic in breast milk. Now, obviously, that's something that's incredibly applicable to my life right now with a young infant, but there's a lot of mothers. And I saw that, and it wasn't just that they found plastic, it was just that not even from people using plastic containers or having, close exposure, but literally from air pollution. So when we talk about this being an existential threat, this is not theoretical. I want to name a few cities for everyone. Jackson, Mississippi. They couldn't drink their water. Flint, Michigan. I don't have to remind everyone about what happened in Flint, Michigan. Southern Florida, right here in New York State. A number of the projects that I'm doing and funding from the state right here in our community are resilience projects to make sure that our shores are resilient to rising water levels and flooding. This is happening now. It's at our doorstep, and we need to act with the urgency and as aggressively as possible to help fight this climate change.
Thank you very much. Now, Samra, you will be answering first this question. What do you think of the New York Health Act, which would create single-payer health care in New York State, and why?
I'll start with I'm a proud co-sponsor of the New York Health Act, and then I'll explain why. I'm going to tell a story again because I think that it's the best way to help describe for folks what life could be like, because it doesn't have to be as hard as it is right now. First of all, we have to stop looking at healthcare as a privilege for the few, as a privilege for those who can afford it. And even those who are insured are often unable to get the care that they need. And so I share this story of my grandfather. He's 86 years old. He's lived in this community his entire life. He was a coach. He was a mentor. He retired at least 5 different times because he just loves to work and be out and with people, the extrovert that he is. And I kid you not, a few days ago, he called me, and he's done this several times. He called me and said, what can we do about these prescription drug prices. I'm literally choosing between a car payment or my mortgage or buying this medication that I know I need. And he knows that there's people that he's talking to that are choosing between buying dinner for their kids one night or getting their medication for diabetes. This is all because we don't have a system that is based on caring for people. And we would think that after going through the global pandemic that we all just suffered, where we saw what happened when we don't build up our healthcare system. We saw what happened when we don't have preventative care for people to fight things like diabetes and heart disease so that they're not prone to get COVID-19 and to die from COVID-19. And those are the reasons that we need a better solution, because even though many people have health insurance, most of them are still undercovered and they're still not getting the care that they need.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morell, would you please answer that question?
Yeah, this is a great question. I recently, my manufacturing company's in the city, and it's close to a Hispanic church, and I've gotten to know that church and many of the people there pretty closely, and especially a big Puerto Rican community. And they actually brought up the New York State Healthcare Act, and they said, I'm going to support you and vote for you, but you need to do everything you can to defeat that act. That will destroy healthcare in our state. I know what I'm talking about. I came here from Puerto Rico. I still have family there. We put in a Puerto Rican Healthcare Act, which was very similar to the New York State one. It has left people with the barest of bones. You cannot get a doctor's appointment anymore. You call, they tell you to show up in an auditorium style, gymnasium style building, and you have to wait and hope that you get called. There is no doctor's appointments. In addition to that, we have medical prescription costs are high because New York State isn't allowing us to go to free market bidding on prescription drugs. That's New York State, and unfortunately the Democrat administration's fault completely, and we need to change that as well.
Thank you. Now, for the next question, you will answer first, Mr. Morell. Can you give us more information on what you would do to help with the education within the city of Rochester?
I certainly will, and I really like that question. Frankly, the education is a disaster. 5 out of 10 children flunk or drop out of school. During the time Samra Brouk has been in office, nothing has changed. That's a 50% failure rate, which means 50% don't make it through. And if you imagine if you had a company and 50% of your products was failure, how long would that last? But we've allowed it to go on for over a decade. It's beyond disgraceful. It's disgusting. So one of the things that I would do is introduce statewide what I call the program I have is my non-college career initiative. This is built on the premise of the reality that we have right now. All our kids are being told they have to go get a 4-year college degree to be successful. They're not being instructed in anything outside of those parameters of any real content. This is the narrative in every high school. Frankly, a lot of kids know that they don't want to go to college. They're not college material. It's great if you want to go, but if you don't want, there's no message. My non-college career initiative is something similar to what I did at my charter school. First of all, it's an awareness campaign to start. I create a publication for all students to be received. It gives job title, job description, starting pay and pay in tenures for every non-college career job, from machinists to medical techs, from physical therapy assistants and plumbers, contractors, welders, mechanics. Then following that, we did a 1-month internship at all the local businesses for any students that wanted to participate. That 1-month internship was in July of their senior year. Huge success. It's a 1-month interview. The student gets to work and the employer gets to look at them. They can offer them a job if they want to. That would be my biggest kickoff to trying to give a bigger, wider path forward for all of our students.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brouk, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. And this is obviously one of my top priorities. It was one of the top priorities I went to Albany to fight for. And again, I did that because literally public schools made me who I am and allowed me to be here. And I shared earlier that my mother, that's how she supported our family, was by being a public school educator. But what I didn't share is that my father, when he came here from Ethiopia, came here to finish his education. And where did he end up being able to do that? But SUNY Brockport. And so I know the power of our public education and our institutions here in New York because I am living that. And because of that, I also know what equitable funding can do for schools. And unfortunately, the truth is, our city of Rochester had spent years and years and years without full funding from our state. We simply cannot expect the same outcomes from an underfunded school compared to a well-funded school. For the first time ever, we have fully funded foundation aid, which is fully funding equitable funding for our schools. We just closed out the first school year with full funding, but we know that it's not just adequate funding, it's also sustained funding. And so now I work very closely with our school district to make sure that we are using that funding to the best to further improve outcomes for our young people.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Brouk, do you trust the results of the 2020 election? That's a question from the audience.
I trust the results of the election in the 2020 election, but in that question is also the understanding that there are enough people who don't trust them. And I also want to just make sure we understand the gravity of this situation. It's not that people don't trust the election. It's that the Republican Party on a national level has figured out the exact type of fear-mongering and disinformation that can sway people to lose their faith in our democracy. On January 6th, 2021, it was my first day as a state senator. We did a ceremonial swearing in via Zoom because we were in the middle of COVID-19. And then we saw what happened in our Capitol. The juxtaposition of being elected to represent your community on the same day that people who do not no longer believe in your democracy try to take it down was unbelievable. It was something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And that's why it's important that we need people who will call these things out. Again, these are not theoretical threats, folks. These are real things. We have elected officials right now who don't believe Joe Biden is our elected president. And that's a major problem. And that is a threat to our democracy. It's a threat to what we do here in New York, but it's a threat all over this country and really this world.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, could you just repeat the question quickly?
Surely. Do you trust the results of the 2020 election? And it's from the audience.
Yes, I do trust the results from the 2020 election, but I just want to say, really, the reality is that only people on the extreme right or extreme left keep stoking this fear-mongering position. Most people trust the 2020 results. And I just want to mention, in reference to the last question about education, it seems like one of the things I'm frustrated with as an independent is that the answer from the Democrat Party is typically what Samra just gave: throw more money at it, even though we spend more dollars per student than any state in the entire nation. It gets down to a point in our state where affordability, as New York State, I've been out talking, I've probably knocked on 7,000 doors in the last 3 months alone. And most New Yorkers' response to their retirement is, I'm going to get out of New York. We don't need more dollars. We need better supporting dollars. We need better use of those dollars. So we need to reallocate wasteful spending so that we can not increase homeowner property taxes, but actually cut them. We need to cut senior state income tax from 8% to 4% because we're pushing them right out of the state, which is going to put a bigger burden and create less dollars for education. We need to reduce or eliminate our gas and grocery taxes. And lastly, we need to have accountability. Samra Brouk and the Democrat Party supported. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just saw the stop sign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Now you will have the opportunity to answer this question first. What are your thoughts on the Fair Pay for Home Care Act, which is also a question from the audience?
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the specifics, but I do agree with the fact that people that are at home taking care of a loved one should be compensated as I believe they are now. But to finish my last statement, accountability is horrible in this state. And all we do is say, well, let's spend more money. And every time you see a card come in the mail, well, I got this much money for this. But the results are what matter. The outcomes are what matter. So we recently, in 2020, Senator Brouk gave $500,000 to the Police Accountability Board. Well, now that budget's inflated to $5 million. Other than 2 directors resigning and 6 staff quitting and constant infighting, I see no accomplishments. As a state senator, I don't mind giving money for good causes, but I will hold people accountable. I will look at what they're doing. I will set goals and objectives and expect reports on those things.
Thank you. The same question to you. It's about the Fair Pay for Home Care Act. Ms. Brouk.
Thank you. Well, I think this goes, we've talked a little bit about our aging population. I had the privilege of working in senior services before becoming a state senator. And a lot of what I did was setting up services for seniors in their homes so that they could age in place. We know that the best place to age for so many of our seniors is in their home with the services they need, the helps that they need. So what we did was actually try to do that for them. And interestingly, that was one of the last jobs I had. It was a company I had helped start from the ground up. It was one of the last jobs I had before going into politics, because quite frankly, every person I was walking through these processes with, I kept running into broken policy. And I thought to myself, whoever made these policies has no intention on aging, because if they did, they would make them better and they would think about what that experience is actually going to be like. And so I am proud to be endorsed as a champion for fair pay for home care. And it's absolutely something that we need to value. That work, caring for our seniors, caring for people in their homes, is one of the most important jobs that we have. And we have to show them that we value them for that work.
Thank you. Ms. Brouk, you are now up for the first question, first person to answer this. New York's concealed gun carry law, passed in response to a U.S. Supreme Court decision, is currently in the courts. What are your thoughts on the law, and how do you think the state should respond to gun violence?
So again, I answer these questions as a sitting state senator and someone who is very, very strong-minded in the fact that we need stronger protections against gun violence. But I think, as anyone can attest, regardless of what your job is and that you do every day, first and foremost, you're thinking about your family and your loved ones. And I'm thinking about my daughter, and I'm thinking about how she's growing up in our city, the same city I grew up in, the same city I walked to school in, and my grandmother would be a couple blocks behind, but I could walk up and I felt safe and I knew my community. Or I could walk to the corner store and get my 25-cent Little Debbie cookie. And that's what I want for her. That's why I've chosen to raise my family in this city. And so, yes, we absolutely needed to go back into session and make sure that we were protecting New Yorkers the way we always had been for over a century with this concealed carry law. And now it's in the courts. And so we need to continue to do that work to make sure that our laws pass muster, because at the end of the day, our job is to keep New Yorkers safe. We have some of the strongest gun safety laws in the entire country, and we need to keep it that way.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you please answer that question?
Yes. Okay. So I've often said to this type of topic, if you could put a piece of paper in front of me that would stop all the gun violence and stop all the murders, because that's all law is, right? It's a piece of paper. It makes us all feel good. We talk about it. We get emotional. We put stories to it. We say prayers and well wishes, but it's just a piece of paper and it does nothing. And we've seen that now, because once again, we have the highest crime rate. The FBI ranked us top 5 most dangerous cities in New York State. And the reality is, and I know this is a difficult one, but it's just reality. 2 years ago, the Democrat administration in power and Samra Brouk supported all of the failed policies that have created this upspike in murders, homicides, and violence. Defunding the police, elimination of bail, well-intentioned maybe, but compassion without accountability leads to chaos. We can and we should have both. We need to reinstate bail and revise it. We need to give judges jurisdiction. The people that are committing the murders are the same repeat offenders. No one should be able to pistol whip you, your daughter, your son, your father, your brother, your husband, push you out of your car for dead, take your car, and the next day they get out with an appearance ticket. If that isn't the definition of insanity and of a breakdown of civilization, which has happened under the last 2 years administration, which Senator Brouk participated in, I don't know how else you define it. There's no getting away from the facts. These are not opinions. These are not Democrats. These are not Republicans. They're just facts.
All right, thank you. Now, the next question is for you, Mr. Morell. What will you do to ensure women receive equal pay for equal work? And that is also from the audience.
Well, I think we have some of the greatest labor laws in New York State that exist. As far as equal pay for equal work, I think we need to take a little closer look. Women should obviously be paid equally for what they do. But oftentimes the statistics and the data don't reflect the backstory. Sometimes men are willing to do some of the dirtiest jobs, working in sewers and power plants and graveyards and such, and they're paid more for it. Sometimes, I recently read an interesting story that was given to me by a female neighbor who's a doctor, and her point was, she read something to the effect that female doctors are paid less than male doctors. But when you do the background detail look, it turns out that male doctors work on average 500 hours more a year than female doctors, because female doctors want to be with their children. They're making a good enough income that they don't need to work as many hours. So we should definitely, I 100% support equality and equal pay for equal work, but we need to look at the detail behind that, because if we're just looking at blank covering statements like that, they don't really help us to make educated, wise, and insightful decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Brouk, how would you answer to that question?
Well, why don't I take a minute to educate then? Because as a woman who worked in the private sector and is now a public figure, obviously working as a state senator, I can 100% attest that I rarely earned what a lot of my male counterparts earned. And I'm almost certain that if you talk to any of my bosses previously, they'd say I put in just as much work as anyone else and came out with just as much productivity as anyone else. The fact of the matter is, this is an issue that we, again, should not be having to argue anymore. You either believe in equal work and equal pay, or you don't. There really are no contingencies. There's no buts, ands, ifs. It's equal work for equal pay. And the fact that I get asked every year, multiple times a year, to come speak at equal pay days, because we actually can mark every year how long it would take a woman to work on top of a year's work to earn what a man doing the same work does. We've got women's equal pay day, Black women's equal pay day, because we earn even less, Latino women's pay day, because they earn even less, Indigenous women's pay day. I wish we no longer had to celebrate these days so that we could actually earn equal pay for equal work.
Thank you. Thank you. And okay, this is our last question. I just got the message. The last question would be, let's see, Ms. Brouk, do you support the recent restriction of ownership of semi-automatic weapons to only those persons over 21, and why?
I obviously voted yes for this legislation, and I actually don't think it goes far enough. We have seen in this country that we are under threat from gun violence, but more than just gun violence, we're under threat from things like mass shootings and massacres. If we all remember what happened in New York State, it still rocks us in Buffalo. And I just want to share with people where I was when I heard about this. I was a new mom. She was 5 or 6 weeks old. And I turn on the news to hear of this massacre and everything that went into this happening. And the fact of the matter is, in other countries, they're not faced with this. And that's because they have stronger gun laws than we do. So this was definitely a step in the right direction. Nobody needs semi-automatic weapons on the everyday. And we need to continue strengthening these gun safety laws so that we can all feel safe in our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you like to answer that question?
Yes. During my career in my life, I did a lot of business in foreign countries, Mexico, the interior, Europe, all over the world. And countries are safer because they actually enforce their laws. They don't allow violent felons out with an appearance ticket. That's just the reality of it. So the reality is we already have bans on guns. They're banned from schools, they're banned from stores, they're banned from businesses, they're banned from public places. We write law after law after law after law. But if we don't take the people out of society that are doing all the killing, as I mentioned, I think earlier, Democrat Mayor Malik Evans, who stated on September 30th in the press conference after the shooting of a 3-year-old, he said, "Do you know how many homicides were committed by people who carry legal guns? 0, zip, nada." So all the rhetoric that I hear from the Democrats frankly, I just get disgusted with it because we have to protect people. We have to stop pretending. We have to stop making excuses. We have to stop passing the buck. This is not going to protect our societies and our communities. We need to enforce
Okay.
laws.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Brouk, would you please present your 1-minute closing statement?
I want to thank again, Georgia, for a phenomenal forum, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on today. You know, to all of you listening, 2 years ago, I came in a forum just like this and many others and asked you to believe in the vision that I was putting forward for our district, a vision that I believe we all shared for what we wanted to see here in the 55th district. And more than anything, what you all told me was that you wanted to have a voice at the table where decisions were being made. I gave you that voice. Rochester, for the first time in a very long time, has a voice in our Democratic majority so that we are considered every time resources are being allocated, legislation is being considered. You also told me that your teachers and your students needed more support. So I came back and advocated for the largest investment the state has ever made in our public schools. You also told me that reproductive choice and body autonomy was important to you. And that was when theoretically we thought that the Supreme Court might overturn those rights. Well, I'm coming back to tell you we did it. We have codified Roe v. Wade. We have passed a constitutional amendment, but our work is not done. And that is exactly what's on the ballot this year. And that's why I need your support again on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morell, would you please give your 1-minute closing statement?
Yes, I would ask all the listeners. First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Georgia. It's really simple. In 2 years, are you safer than you were 2 years ago? Are you better off financially than you were 2 years ago? Has your education improved in the last 2 years? We've made the largest investment as education. Senator Brouk just told you that. Have you seen any positive outcomes of that? You see, the reality is these dollars that are always being spent, most of us have no idea where they're going because, as she even said, there's not enough supplies at school, even though we've had the largest investment in education. I will work for taxpayers, not against them. We need more cooperation between parties to get things done. Life is constant change. New problems require new thinking and willingness to change. As new facts come out, we have to try new approaches. Look at what's working. Stop throwing away good money after bad. Focus on priorities. Look at trends. What will our future look like? We need to extrapolate it out. Change has to start today. Success doesn't happen overnight. You have to work together until we get the results. Unity requires compromise and compassion and accountability. I'm committed to turning things around, and I hope you'll vote for me on November 8th. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a very informative discussion. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters and our audience, I'd like to thank you for your thoughtful answers to some very important questions. And now I'm going to turn it back to Barbara.
Thank you, Georgia. And let me add my thanks to our candidates. You've done exactly what we wanted, which is to come and answer questions from our audience and from our members and really give us a sense of who you are and what you're about. And that's what we try to provide. This forum was recorded and it will be posted to our Facebook page in the next day or two. I'm going to remind both of our candidates that it is part of the agreement you signed that if you were to use the video for anything, you're welcome to link to it, but you're not really allowed to take little pieces out and extract sound bites and edit and distort them. It's not that anyone would do that. All right, thank you very much. Reminder that early voting starts on October 29th. If you want to do absentee voting, you must apply for an absentee ballot. And November 8th, if you want to vote on election day, you go to your assigned polling location. We urge you all to verify that information because some polling districts have changed. But in early voting, you can vote at any of the locations throughout Monroe County.